Hello, welcome everyone to the next panel discussion, and the topic is employee experience, the real competitive advantage. My name is Jessica DuBois. I'm out of Washington, D.C. I'm an employee benefits advisor here, and joined with me, I have Bryan Adams, the CEO of Ph.Creative, and Melissa Surdez, the global head of employee experience at Johnson & Johnson. So with that, I would love to provide you both with a few minutes to explain your role and if you could, what employee experience means to you. We can go ahead and start off with that as well. Bryan, go for it.
Okay, well, I'll keep this brief so we can dive into the good stuff. But hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I'm Bryan Adams, CEO and founder of Ph.Creative. PH is a global employer branding agency, and we specialize with working with large global brands with complex talent audiences. So clients such as Apple, American Airlines, GBC, Blizzard, Nordstrom, and so on. So I guess PH is most known globally for our work from in the candidate experience space, the work we did for Virgin that basically supplied the industry with the business case for a candidate experience when we successfully made the link between poor candidate experience and annual loss of customer revenue to the tune of $6 million. When we went in there, we discovered that customers who were candidates were so disappointed with their candidate experience, they were going home and switching to their nearest competitor. So we found that, we plugged the gap, we turned the candidate experience around and paved the way to actually turning candidates into customers and reversing the losses. So that case study is all over the web. So that's if you've heard of Ph.Creative, it might be attached to that. We're probably recognized for being one of the most creative employer brand agencies in the space. But our next mission, and should you choose to accept it, is to help us, is to change how the industry thinks about employer brand and what it's fundamentally used for, which kind of leads us nicely into the conversation of employee experience, because how we set expectations of employees and candidates is a huge part of designing experience by design from an employee experience point of view. You know, we believe that employer brand should be used more of a smart filter to in between recruitment marketing and recruitment, so people can self-select out if they don't think they're a good culture match. You know, so we say, you know, if you use employer brand to repel the many and just compel the few that are a good culture match. But internally, what we find is if you lean into the harsh realities and the adversities of the employee experience, that people feel acknowledged, they feel appreciated, and actually they wear those sacrifices and commitments like a badge of honor. Because if you can thrive within an organization that challenges you, you know, then it really is a place to find advocacy, and also it's usually the indicator of where to find passion and foster pride. So we're very excited to be talking to you about candidate employee experience today, and see if you agree with our approach to employer brand at the end of it. So that's me, Bryan Adams from Ph.Creative. I'll hand over to Melissa to introduce us.
Awesome. Thank you very much. Hi, everybody. And I understand there's a lot of everybody's on the call. I am super excited to be on this panel discussion and to really hear from as many of you as we can in this next hour about your thoughts around employee experience. But let me give you a little bit about my background. So I have been an HR partner for my entire career. I started with GE, General Electric, for 10 years as an HR partner to various businesses within the capital business. And then I've been with Johnson & Johnson for the last 19 years as an HR partner. And officially, January 2nd of this year, I moved into a brand new role that's very different for me personally, but it is in the employee experience and leading the employee experience for Johnson & Johnson from an HR perspective, meaning my team and I, we are looking at all of the experiences from HR, from soup to nuts, from when you first come on board at J&J all the way to when you retire or leave Johnson & Johnson, and everything in between. And what I love about this is it is so different for me. It's a very different role than being an HR partner my entire career. But there is something that is very familiar feeling to it as well. Because when you are an HR and you're an HR partner, you have your ear to the ground and you are the closest link to employees throughout all of their various journeys. So you understand what it feels like, what the experiences feel like along the whole chain of your life cycle within a company. And to Bryan's point, I have always said you spend more time at work than you do at home. So the feeling at work, you need to really be linked into it. And in today's day and age, I mean, let's call this out. The world that we're living in today is an immediate world that is more digital than ever before. And we as consumers, as just people, we assume that everything we need to do, whether that's home or at work, should be frictionless and easy, and hopefully by the click of a button on our phone. So employee experiences at work, we got to get to that place. Now, maybe not 100% is going to be via phone, but we got to get to that place. And I have been so passionate around connecting with employees throughout my career and hearing employee stories that, again, even though this is such a different space for me, it's familiar and it just excites me. And then bottom line, I'm an employee too. So how I feel about my processes, how I feel personally when I need to get something done, whether it's, you know, I'm getting ready for my year-end review as an employee, or I'd like to talk to my leader about development for myself or for my team. I'm an employee. I am a user of these HR experiences, and I want them to have ease of use, because all that's going to do is, in the end, make me a more productive employee in the whole ecosystem at Johnson & Johnson. So that's a little bit about what I'm doing.
That was a great introduction. I'm already writing notes from both of your introductions. Those were fantastic. So both of you work for global organizations, have global brands. What are some universal things people want from employee experience that you've noticed in your role?
So for me, I guess slightly different to Melissa, I have the opportunity to work with a wide variety of global organizations, different global leaders, witness different cultures. And as a result, through our research, we see many, many, many different types of employee experiences. That said, it's interesting from our research. Typically, what you find is there are three main universal things that people tend to want from their employee experience. And essentially, people are just looking to be happy, right? People want to answer these four questions: what do they love? What are they good at? What can they be paid for? And what does the world need? So these are the things that are sort of what we call motivators and drivers for employees or associates that are part of your organization. From our experience and from our research, we've distilled it down to everything an employee could possibly name, falling into one of three buckets. And these are purpose, impact, and belonging. So if you name any specific that an employee might want, you will find the derivative underneath. It either falls under a sense of purpose, so what's it all about, meaningful work. But that could be about self-respect and career progression. Impact, so actually making a difference, so what you do matters. And then a sense of belonging. So if when you're doing your research, you bear those three distinct categories in mind, essentially you can make sure that you're satisfying all three of them, but more specifically, find out where the sense of purpose, impact, and belonging shows up in your own culture, and then you know what to dial up and dial down, play to your strengths, but also not to be afraid of setting out the expectations that from an employee experience point of view. if you want to benefit from the organization, here's how to optimize your chances. And sometimes that means taking on challenges, getting out of your comfort zone, stretching your capability, and taking on adversity that's all around you, because anything worthwhile, it's not easy, is it? So essentially, that's what we find: impact, purpose, and belonging.
I like that.
Yeah, so I'm very glad that Bryan went first, because that was a great cue up for how I explain it too. I love you, Bryan. I don't even really know you, but I love you. Okay, so let me break down Johnson & Johnson. It starts with our credo. And if you've done any research on J&J, our credo is the core of who we are as an organization. And then that breaks down to who we are as individuals. It's all about our responsibilities. And the responsibilities start with our patients, doctors, nurses, moms, dads, consumers, customers. And then the next paragraph in our credo is, we're responsible for our own employees. And the third paragraph is the communities in which we live in as employees. And then finally, if we do all those things, the shareholder, you're going to see your return on value for the shareholder. And so what's really important about that, if we just talk about the second paragraph about employees, it actually says in there, as employees, we want to be involved. We want to feel included and inclusive. And if I think through the overall purpose of Johnson & Johnson, Johnson & Johnson's purpose as an employee, we're blending our heart, science, and ingenuity to profoundly change the trajectory of health and humanity. That is something that as an employee and as a consumer and as a patient and a mom and a dad, it really is very personal to you as a J&Jer. And I believe employee experience, what that really bottles into is we have an obligation for an employee to really fulfill what that means to them, the purpose. We need to help unlock an employee's full potential. That basically enables them, I know this is going to sound very basic, but it enables them to have their best day ever, every day. And when you talk, Jess, about it being a global company, you're absolutely right. So the best day ever, every day, for an employee that is sitting in Shanghai versus an employee that is sitting in San Jose dos Campos, for an employee that's sitting in Toronto, it can be different. And that's okay. We are all about how do you interpret that purpose in a sense of you belonging and connecting to J&J. And really the employee experience, again, in my particular shop around HR process is let's get out of our own way. Let's make those processes simpler, frictionless, more ease of use, fast, quick, so that the employee can get on with it, can get on with having their best day, whatever that is for them. It's very personalized. It's not a one-size-fits-all.
I like that. And I want to follow up on what you just said, Melissa. So when you're thinking about the employee experience, you're thinking about all the locations you have to and the different types of employees you have, the psychographics, all of that. Are you designing employee experience? Are you tailoring it to different regions? Are you creating an overall employee experience and then funneling it down between different types of people? Are you trying to create an employee experience for the employee you want to have? What are some thoughts that are put into that?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. Being 8 weeks on the job, I will tell you, one of the things that I tapped into very quickly was some phenomenal work that was done last year from our workforce analytics group, specifically a powerhouse of a woman, Gitanjali, who I think might even be on the call. So I'm giving a massive shout out to Gitanjali. But the work that was done, which they took data from a lot of disparate parts that we collect data from within J&J. And what they did was they were able to sort of create segments of our employees on a global basis in a very obvious, simple way, meaning you have employees that, are commercial employees, you have leaders for commercial, individual contributors for commercial, you have supply chain employees, you have R&D employees, and you need to ensure that really the experience for employees is never going to be a one-size-fits-all. And you do have to look at the segments of employees. And if you think about it, it's very obvious. And having been in HR as a partner for those 19 years, I've had every segment as a business partner. So I know that those that come into a plant and are making Tylenol, you know, their experiences with HR processes are very different than our commercial employees that are out there selling every day to our docs and nurses, et cetera. You know, a person on the shop floor may only have an opportunity to get to a digital kiosk a couple times a day. So you can't have a one-size-fits-all. You really have to break it into the segments for employees. Now, having said that, there shouldn't be 50 million different ways to do something, because all that's going to do is cause a lot of confusion. You do have to be able to raise it up a notch. And that's where I think the power of the digital ecosystem can really help simplify. You know, we are in a whole new world now where technology can really help us have a simple platform, but be able to individualize accordingly.
I like that. And Bryan, do you have anything to add for that question? If not, I'll move on.
Yeah, well, literally just to echo the sentiment, really. And I think it's really important to have that agility and flexibility. Otherwise, what you find is it turns out to be a broadcast or something that you're pushing uphill and trying to impose on people instead of it being embraced and engaged with. You know, so if you do have that flexibility, you know, what we've found from working with lots of different organizations is sometimes you'll find a correlating sentiment across the globe in different territories, even just different seniorities or different functions in a business, but the language is different. And being able to recognize that and actually encourage it and celebrate it is really important, because that allows you to then make the links, create more cohesion with an organization, but also it's a really important key for localization as well. And you know, if you don't get that balance right, you lose an element of authenticity, and with that you lose engagement. You know, and this has to be a two-way street. You know, it's a proposition from an employee value proposition perspective. There's a clue in the name. You know, you've got to uphold your side of the bargain if you're going to expect employees to act how you would like them to act.
Mm-hmm. So taking a step back, looking at it being a two-way street, how can an employer understand how their current employee experience is? How can they evaluate that and put themselves in employees' shoes?
So there's a very, very short answer to this, and there's but you know, the short answer is you ask, you observe, you experience, you know, and simply you do your research. What we find is we like to map out how people feel, how they think, how easy it is to be and move along. What are the memorable moments, and what is the story? You know, because by understanding those ingredients, that allows us to have an element of not controlling the narrative, because you know, with brand and employee experience, it's very difficult to have control these days. But actually, if you've got any shot at influencing towards the culture and the set of behaviours that we're looking to end up with here, giving people evidence-based employee stories that are very good examples of narrative, a really good way to take to take the friction out of how to talk about the organization. So that's really important. And then the final three things to map before you can move forward with designing the employee experience, Melissa mentioned it, is understanding the technology that's involved or not. You know, these days it should be an enabler, but in many organizations it is not. And then who's accountable, you know, for those branded moments, you know, and then just, you know, what other practicalities do you have to bear in mind, you know. But you'd be surprised just how much insight you can get with a room full of people who are engaged and willing to share their experiences. And I guess whilst you are mapping that out, what I would say is, while you have those people in that room, just listen out for absolute gold in terms of stories that really make the point, you know, and sometimes it's the smallest, tiniest stories with, you know, lots of detail that that really sort of give you that platform to make your point for you. But, you know, really, this isn't something that can be baked and conceived at head office and rolled out if you want it to be authentic or you want it to add value to an organization. You know, you have to take the time to empathetically listen, probe, engage, ask, observe, and experience it if it's going to be authentic.
Yeah, and I'll just jump onto that. I completely agree. I also think I think it's really important to, well, number one, you got to ask, and you have to get in there, and that starts with trust. You know, I think many companies, not just Johnson & Johnson, we can sometimes suffer from survey fatigue. And so an employee, you know, if they see you coming saying, I want to have this focus group, I want to ask you a couple questions, automatically they may sort of have that guard up. And you really have to figure out a way to connect with them, that group, and build that trust so that they understand, okay, no, wait a minute. You want to hear how I live in my shoes every day here at J&J, because it matters to you. That gets with the storytelling, I think, Bryan, that you're getting at. The more stories we tell and the more we share, we connect more with each other, we get sticky, and that's gold. That's golden. The other piece that I think is so important, and this is always the first thing to like fall off and never happen, follow up. So you heard something, you listened, you spent the time to collect the data. Now what? Now, the now what may not happen, like the very, you know, ticked and tied outcome may not happen for another 4 or 5 months. But what is happening each little win or little step of the way so that that group knew, okay, you came out here, you spent a couple hours with me, I bared my soul to you, and you know what? You're working towards it. I get it. You want to keep people engaged. The follow through is critical. And then lastly, I do think, and I don't think this is just a Johnson & Johnson thing, I think that in today's world where we're trying to go to a lot of self-service and easier way of doing things, there is one particular group of employees that still hold the burden of getting stuff done. And that is the administrative team, the executive assistants, the admin assistants. And I can tell you, I think that they are always very, very overlooked in terms of being either included for focus groups or just included with, hey, we just rolled this new thing out. How did that land on you? Because they're the ones that are doing the work. And I got to tell you, when you talk about gold, that's the group. If you can crack that group, get the trust, you can solve over half the world's problems just hearing from the admins. They run the company. I always think that.
Do you know, you're so right, Melissa, and I'm smiling because when we first started doing candidate experience mapping, we focused 100% on the candidate. And then after a couple of years, we realized, hang on a minute, we need to empathy map the recruiter and the hiring manager, because like what we present for the candidate, the best case isn't always practical. And if we don't include the headaches and challenges that the recruiter encounters, then it's not going to work. You know, and then we went further, their sourcing and their admin team, and that's when you get the real good stuff, you know. But just building on that a little bit for me, and Jessica, you actually alluded to this earlier. When we ask those feel, think, ease, and memorable moment questions, we always ask best day, worst day, typical day, and then future aspirational state. And we always put it 5 or 10 years into the future. What's interesting about that is you usually get very creative solutions to today. And there's no reason why you can't take those answers and put them in your solution for today. You know, but because for some reason you're presenting it 10 years in the future, people are like, wow, well, one day, what if we have an ATS that works? Or one day, you know, and then, but sometimes there's small details and you can say, well, why don't we just do that today? You know, so that's a great tip when you're mapping best day, worst day, typical, and future.
I love that.
I do too. I do too. And I'm going to throw you both a curveball right now, because both of your answers were so focused on connection. Though Bryan, you did mention some technology as well. I'm curious to your thoughts on when should we look at benchmarking data and focus on technology and analytics versus getting in there, doing the groundwork, connecting with employees? What's the happy medium between that? And is it different between a 10-person company and a 100,000 person company?
So I'll kick us off, Melissa, if that's all right. So imagine 2 guitars, a set of drums, and 4 guys from Liverpool, okay? They changed the world. They're called the Beatles, right? It's not the tools, it's how you use the tools. We say it all the time, it's not the tools, it's how you use the tools. Now, typically, we go into organizations that are running so lean that they can't afford the latest and greatest technology. So what do they use instead? They use creative thinking, ingenuity, they use team, and they use, and then at the other end of the scale, we see overinvestment in technology, and usually it's being used 5% of the utilization or the potential of those tools. A lot of the time, they're not measuring performance that you could be measuring. And actually, I would say, before we jump into what tools should we be using and so on and so forth, let's be clear on the metrics that matter. What should we be measuring? What creates impact? And this is a bit of a bugbear, actually. So organizations, typically when you put an employer brand in place, the first indicator of success is an increase in volume of applicants. Are we more magnetic? Are we more brand awareness? Well, actually, I've never met a TA leader that actually wants more applicants. When we look at the percentage of valued applicants, that's a different story. Then internally, retention is something that is often measured. But actually, imagine a 1,000-person organization and 100 people are consistently leaving the organization every month. If you were to have to make a comment on that, whether it was good or bad, it's actually quite difficult if you think about it, because if those 100 people, nobody would rehire, nobody would want them back in the team, then you could argue it's a good thing. If, however, the 100 people leaving every month were your rising stars and top performers, then we've got a catastrophe on our hands. So actually measuring regrettable loss or talent flow going from a competitor or to a competitor, what are the smart metrics that we can put in place, the metrics that matter? And then, what are the metrics that align with the business strategy, so we know that we're creating impact and we're contributing to, to the direction of the business. So that's my tuppence worth to kick us off. Melissa?
Okay. I like it. Now, I would like on the other side of the pond, I would like for you to consider, not, a drum set, some guitars, and 4 men from Liverpool, who I do love, but why don't you consider, some of the best drums known to man, the keyboard, a couple of great guitars, and a handsome young man from Asbury Park, New Jersey, called Bruce Springsteen and the Eat Street Band. Just let me throw that out there, because I got a little Jersey love over here. Right. For me, I think the idea of when you bring technology into the conversation and the metrics, net promoter score. This is what we do with our consumers. We should be doing it with ourselves, right? And that is a very big thing with J&J, that we're trying to, number one, establish what's the right sort of benchmark for our net promoter scores in each of the areas. Now, specifically talking just HR. So to your point, Bryan, what's the right net promoter score within talent acquisition? And then obviously, within talent management, learning and development, employee relations, et cetera. Personally, I do think, such a big company like J&J, and we, for the most part, for all of our existence, have been incredibly decentralized. We have centralized ourselves a whole lot more around our overall purpose and our overall feeling of belonging, I think we have some very cool technologies that we are already working on. It's just finding it and figuring out how to bring it to the larger enterprise scale, and then filling in the holes of where maybe we don't have it. But I mean, it's a big job, and we do have a team that is on it, and they're amazing, taking a look at what do we have, what do we need, and why do we need it. But the Net Promoter Score is key. And not only is that key, what's even more important is having people take that quick 4-star, 5-star to show a Net Promoter Score. Think about that. This survey fatigue that I've already talked about, and most people, and I'm one of them, if I'm unhappy, that's when I'm filling out my survey, right? But if I'm happy, I got a million and other things to do. However, I'm much more apt to maybe complete the survey again when it's on my phone or crisp and snappy when the 4 stars pop up. I'm like, oh, I'll go give my 4 stars. So we got to figure that out so that we can capture the data in its totality. That's a challenge. And if anybody out there has figured that challenge out, we got time on this call. I'm all ears.
Melissa, I think you're spot on. And to reiterate something you said earlier, we use Net Promoter Score. We've actually built our own NPS just for candidate experience. One of the biggest, most important things there is your point earlier is follow up. So there's no point measuring this stuff if you don't do anything with it, because that fatigue increases so much quicker if it's, why am I answering another survey that disappears into the ether and I never hear anything back, However, if you have timely follow-up and meaningful change and people feel heard, then actually engagement will increase even when somebody complains and isn't happy, and I think engagement is the key. So you're absolutely spot on there. But just to give you your own point back, follow-up is key again.
Now, and I think the Net Promoter Score, so I think that leads us into a really good conversation around employer branding of the employee experience. So I feel passionate about this, as in I think it's something all employers can be doing, whether you're 5 employees or thousands of employees. What are ways that an organization can brand their employee experience for prospective employees, but also to remind their current employees of what their employee experience is like?
Well, let's be clear. Everybody has an employer brand, whether they're aware of it or not, and I think I'm a great believer. I think people are the only competitive advantage left in business today. Everything else can be bought, acquired, commoditized, whatever. But people, now that's the only competitive advantage left in business, which is why employer brand, I think 2020 is the year of employer brand. It's rising to the top of the priority in C-suite, and so it should. So much so that I think employer brand will actually flip and it's already started to influence brand as we know it, the people behind. It's affecting consumer decisions. People want to know, are those sneakers made sustainably, and ethically? Are those coffee beans sourced sustainably, etc.? So there's a great opportunity to add value across the board, and it affects share price. So need I say more? But you're right. Every organization can have an employer brand, and it's essential these days to define it. And the brand can be something aspirational that you want people to work towards. What's important is it's authentic and it's true. Your employees or associates believe in the sentiment, and right below that, the EVP has to be set in reality. But when we're building employer brand and EVP, typically the traditional value of employer brand is to make your organization more attractive. And like I said before, we believe it should be used as a smart filter so people can opt in or out based on a more educated information and an idea of what the organization's like. You know, traditional conventional employer brand, therefore, is more of a broadcast of strengths, benefits, and opportunities. You know, and we believe at Ph.Creative that it's more of a two-way value exchange, you know, which includes the harsh realities, the challenges, the sacrifices and commitments that you've got to make. You know, but this isn't just about being more honest about the employee experience, because what we find is if you give a more well-rounded truth, first of all, you get less reliance on people going to Glassdoor to see the 1-star or the 5-star. Not many people go to Glassdoor and leave a 3, you know. But by leaning in and using good story arc and telling the truth, including harsh realities of an organization, typically it elevates the strengths, benefits, and opportunities, as well as differentiating. We always say your brand of difficult is what makes you different. So again, it starts by listening and engaging your employees to decipher exactly what those universal truths of your organization are. But it needs to be well-rounded. And it's okay to have aspirational aspects as long as you're upfront about that, you know? It's not about communicating reality of just today. It's got to be forward-facing. But that just needs to be explicit so people can see where they are and where you're asking them to go. You know, and if you do that, then it can become a very functional, useful, valuable tool to the organization, just for people to self-select in or out, whether an employee or a candidate. But also your recruiters, hiring managers, the average person working for the company can spot somebody who would be a good culture match. And you're giving them the stories and the vocabulary to explain who you are, what you do, what the purpose of the organization is, how you'll find impact, and what it feels like to belong in that company. And that's essentially what we're trying to do with our employer brand. You know, we call it the give and get employer brand approach. If anyone's interested, my new book comes out called Give and Get Employer Branding on the 17th of March. I've got to get a plug in. There you go. It's done.
There you go. I love the plug. Well, for us, you know, again, our purpose, you know, is a universal J&J purpose, blending heart, science, ingenuity to profoundly change the trajectory for health and humanity. And I would say probably more on the 10-year ago, J&J, very, very decentralized, 3 disparate sectors. You know, we have our consumer sector, our pharmaceutical sector, and our medical device sector. And I would say as a purpose, what was our purpose for employees to rally around? They were 3 distinct different purposes. That has changed. You know, I think that our employees are actually, they identify with the overall Johnson & Johnson purpose and also their everyday sector and operating company that they're a part of, which is pretty cool, because the J&J purpose allows you to sort of connect with wherever in J&J your career is going to take you, and your career at J&J can take you to all 3 sectors, then some, you know, second time, third time around. What's most important, though, is the ability to tell the story and articulate the everyday wins. Just to Bryan's point, you do have to articulate everyday wins. And we have so many avenues at J&J to tell the story. We have amazing employee resource groups, you know, that are created. Anybody can create an employee resource group, and we have a lot. They're global, and they are a platform for our employees in the spirit of, you know, I belong. And again, that second paragraph of the credo, I want to feel included and I want to make suggestions freely. It's a phenomenal avenue to do that. Also, 10 years ago, we got very involved with TEDx with our own chapter. That has really given a platform globally for employees to tell their stories on how they connect to the credo and our purpose in such a personal and incredibly inspiring way. And then finally, I do believe a lot of change starts at the top and it works itself down. Our overall executive committee and our CEO, you know, they are storytellers. And anytime they're in front, whether that's virtually or live in person, in front of any employee base, they're telling the stories of how they personally connect with our purpose. And then lastly, and I can't stress this enough, I do believe that communication, the art of communicating, is vitally important in making sure purpose is embedded throughout the entire organization. Not to be confused with change in communication. Many companies, when they talk about comms, they talk about change in comms. Oh, we need to create a change in comms group. Or we are going to create a new purpose. And once we do that, we have to have a change in communications group that can help explain it. When you put communications in the same paragraph as change, you dilute the importance of communication. And it's not just, creating nice PowerPoints. It is, what are the right modalities to communicate? How do we do it? How does it look and feel? Over the last several years, Johnson & Johnson's communication externally and internally has become the same, no matter what operating company or sector you're in. It all looks and feels the same because, again, that's employee identity. External, whether it's to our customers, our doctors and nurses and patients, or to prospective candidates. What they're going to see and feel is exactly what you're going to see and feel on the inside too. So communication is clear in that identity setting and that purpose setting.
We always find that if the internal comms person is involved in building the employer brand, it goes so much more successfully. You're absolutely right. And I love that, talking about purpose and then inviting people to demonstrate how they feel purpose, or I want to be included. And then people can tell their very personal stories of how they've been made to feel included. That's a great example of how you can globalize and localize in the same one fell swoop. So that's really resonated with me, that, Melissa.
Yeah, you both did fantastic on that question. Some of my favorite answers. I love, Melissa, that you said change starts at the top. I think that could also create the experience for employees. Leaders go first and create the opportunity for employees to feel as if they can contribute to the employee experience, that they can share more about themselves, which I think that improves the overall experience of the entire workplace. So focusing on leaders and having them really buy into it first, I think is so critical. Now, I want you both to think of an HR director of a 50, 100, 150 person company, so a small to mid-sized company. And this person is responsible for recruiting, benefits, employer brand, administrative work, everything. We all know this person. They're in charge of everything. And especially that list grows as the company grows. What are some things that HR director can do to start putting a larger focus on employee experience?
That's a good question. Actually, we tend to work with more global leaders. However, recently we've just hired our first chief people officer, Cher Murphy, who I swear wears a cape under her clothes. And actually she she didn't really know what she was in for. And, as agency life, anyone in agency life will tell you, you've got to wear multiple hats. Now, what I do notice with Cher is insatiable positive attitude, first of all. Without that, it's a non-starter. But she's incredibly experienced, level-headed, and resilient and patient and all that. But she's incredibly well networked, and their community supports her incredibly well. So I would say, if you are going to wear multiple hats, don't be afraid to share your experience, be vulnerable enough to ask for help. And what you'll find is, again, it's a give and get, isn't it? If you give to a community, then they'll be willing to help. The employer brand space and the HR communities on Facebook and LinkedIn or wherever you find them, typically some of the most engaged, empathetic, compassionate groups of people I've ever witnessed, actually. So my biggest number one tip would be to build community and share best practice. You can't do this job. You can't do that job alone.
I would say this, you know, I feel like I have a little bit in common with the HR director from the small company, and I'll tell you why. You know, employee engagement, when you look at it in its totality, it's nauseating because it's a lot. It's a lot, whether it's a big company, a mid-sized company, or a small company. I mean, people will come out of the woodwork and put the kitchen sink into that. So my best advice is, one, chunk it out. You can't be everything to everybody, and you can't try to solve it all, because when you try to do it all, it's a house of cards and it falls apart. I'm in the process myself saying, you know, I'm 8 weeks on the job to say, what am I going to put my line in the sand for 2020? And there's a lot of stuff that people want done, but for 2020, much as I'd like to feel like I wear a cape, I don't. So what am I going to stand for? And what am I going to say, we're going to work through these things? That's number one. You got to chunk it out and then put the line in the sand of what you stand for. Secondly, I can't agree more with Bryan. You know, I feel great about humanity in the last 8 weeks because people outside the organization that I'm just tapping into, that either I've been referred to or just blindly, or because I said to Enrique, yep, I'm going to sign up and do this webcast, and then people are reaching out on LinkedIn to say, hey, you know, I'd love to hear more, or I just started in this space. It makes me love humanity once again, and we live in a crazy world, so I thank you all for that. People are here and waiting to help, and that is amazing. You know, whether you want a small, mid-sized, or large company, you have to get an external lens, because it's not just how it is inside. No matter what size company you are, it's okay to ask for help. And then lastly, when you are the power of one and you just have yourself, you do have an army inside the company that is ready to help. All you have to do is ask. Pick your team, and you may find like, wow, I've got this powerhouse team I never even knew. And they're not in HR, but they're ready to help.
I like that. I love that answer. So I knew this time was going to go by really fast, and it of course did. We're looking at, you know, less than really 10 minutes left. But what I would like to do for the next 10 minutes, and I would like to focus on the future, you know, talking about employee experience in the future. I know some of us feel like we haven't even gotten to the present, but we don't have time for that, right? So I would love to hear from both of you. What are you looking at this year? Let's just focus on 2020. Like what are you all focusing on this year for 2020 employee experience? What are you seeing right now? And what are your goals right now for employee experience?
Melissa, do you want to go first with that one?
Oh, sure. Yeah, so it's very timely because I think I now know what I'm going to put a line in the sand around with my team. And I have a very small team. We're small but mighty. One of the biggest tickets for us is, again, getting back to huge company, Johnson & Johnson, 3 different sectors. When people come on board, it is an interesting experience. I wouldn't say it is a phenomenal employee experience yet. That is the one thing that we're going to take on, one of the biggest ticket items, which is in employee onboarding on behalf of the enterprise of Johnson & Johnson. And certainly there will be a look and feel that will be sector specific, but this overall picture of when you come on board at J&J. So that's one area. Another area is, you know, really asking employees what matters most for you around your employee health. Now, what I mean by that is it's not, you know, calisthenics. I'm talking about, you know, we are a health company and we're very conscious about how that presents itself to each and every employee, right? That could be mental health, financial health, it could be physical health, it could be mindful health. It's a lot of different things. What's the programs that matter to you? What are the programs that are resonating with you? And what are we not even thinking about yet that we should start thinking about as it relates to bringing your whole self to work to be your best day every day? that's another area. And how can we, in what's already established, create a frictionless way to bring your whole self to work? The other big ticket item is offboarding. People leaving Johnson & Johnson, whether that is they found a wonderful opportunity outside J&J, it's not inside J&J, but they're going to go and do wonderful things outside J&J, whether they've reached retirement, which is a wonderful milestone, or whether, it's a reduction in force, or sometimes when people have passed away. I will tell you that all of those different examples of offboarding, they're not smooth. They're not frictionless. And no matter how you leave J&J, it should feel okay. And you should know what's going on. You should never, or again, if it's a situation where, somebody fell ill or what have you, or passed away, the family shouldn't feel, I don't have answers, what's happening. So these are big ticket items that we're laying stake on for this year.
I like that. Hey, Bryan, can I add on to your question, or to your part of this question, is that what messaging are employers look like? Are you recommending this year, looking at in relation to employee experience?
So it's a good question, and something I've been talking about for a while, and again, our framework is called Give and Get Employer Branding, is this idea of authenticity, not just telling the truth about the sunshine, sort of positive days of an organization. I think somebody said the other day that in 2 years' time, it's officially when the millennials are running the world. I'm not sure. I'm not sure. 2022, I think. But what we're finding is an appetite to dig much deeper than surface level of, what it's like, what are the aspirations, what's the purpose, and, employees are demanding that organizations really stand for something and do what they say. So what we're finding is the value exchange of an employer brand is becoming ever more important and prevalent. But then evidencing that and reinforcing that is true is being demanded by employees and associates as well. So, standing for something and then being held accountable for it is definitely something that's showing up in employer branding and EVP work. Outside of that, more and more, we're being challenged to think more creatively and differently about the same old challenges. So for learning and development, and right the way through to onboarding and offboarding, experiences by design is something that we're doing a lot on. And then more tactically, I actually believe this is the year for SEO to enter the space of recruitment marketing and employer branding finally, to make that link between ideal candidates that are searching for a type of organization, so it's much more authentic, genuine conversations between people and brands, giving a much more educated insight into what that employee experience is like.
Yeah, you mentioned something that I found was interesting, was the SEO, the actual digital marketing side of this. I think most people listening probably haven't even thought that far ahead. I haven't, and I talk with employers all the time. It's very, very interesting. So with the last few minutes that we have, I would love to do a two-part question. So one, is there anything that we didn't talk about today that you would have liked to share with all the attendees? And second, what's a way that attendees can follow your journey, where you're at, learn more about Ph.Creative or your role at J&J? How can people connect with you moving forward?
So I'm going to post our website link now. Check out our website. You can contact me there. I put a link to my LinkedIn profile earlier. And, I think we covered most things. I would love to engage with people after this and carry on a conversation about our give and get approach to employer branding and see what people think about the value exchange aspect and leaning into an organization's harsh realities. Posted a link. It's Cutley /give and get for people to enter a competition to win. one of my new books released on 17th of March. So I'll leave you with that and hand over to Melissa.
Yeah, well, for me, it's very simple. Link on in with me in LinkedIn. I will connect with you. I would love to talk to you further about what you are personally doing in this space and how I can learn from you. I mean, I'm a big believer that we live in a big, big world that is actually pretty small. And if you think about it, we've got a lot of things in common that we don't even know about. So I so welcome the opportunity to break some bread with you guys. Link on in with me.
I like it. But we didn't get the opportunity to ask questions from the LinkedIn Live. So if there are questions on there, or if you want to type some up, I will try to get them to Bryan and Melissa, or connect with them in some way in order to ask those questions. Thank you so much, everyone, for attending. And the next session will be starting in 5 minutes. I'm not sure what will happen next, but Enrique will tell us. But thank you so much for joining us.